Let's get a word on all the big political stories of the day. Sophia Worringer is back with us, political commentator. Sophia, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
And nice to have you with us again. I mean, let's pick up on that council tax story as well. I mean, there it is. And this doesn't apparently mean that Rachel Reeves told a little porky or Keir Starmer wasn't honest with us because, you know, working people tax. Obviously, no working people pay council tax, so they've got away with it, apparently. But it is a tax rise.
It is, and it's one of many. And I think when you look at them individually, you might think, OK, that's not too much. £100 a year is the kind of average that this might go up for an average household. Although, of course, I'm not saying that's a small amount of money. Yep. But it's the cumulative impact that is the most going to be felt by households up and down the country.
Correct.
And I think the problem is it's not being followed up by a conversation on what that money is being spent on and why there is so much demand. And in fact, a big driver of the council tax bill is adult social care and the ageing population. And that is only a problem that's going to get worse. And so we need to follow up. If there is going to be more tax, if there is going to be more demand on our pockets, we need to know what is going on, and we need to know that it's going to be spent efficiently. And at the moment, that's not been happening.
Indeed. Sophia, what's going to happen here with, I mean, the social care thing is, it's such a big issue. It should almost be the front page story every day. It's so big. I was about to say it's hurtling around the corner at 1,000 miles an hour, but actually, realistically, it's sort of already here. But as you correctly identify, it's likely to get a whole lot worse as well. I mean, this is a massive problem, and no one's really talking about dealing with it.
It's a very thorny problem, and it's both thorny personally, because everybody knows it's something that they will personally have to deal with, or maybe already dealing with family members in terms of the cost of care as people age or as people are unwell, but also politically, as the former Prime Minister Theresa May found out, was basically her downfall when she tried to touch this issue and try and reform it and find a way for it to be funded. It basically completely kiboshed her general election campaign. So I think no one following that really wants to touch it. They want to kick it down the road and make it somebody else's problem. But I think the general public are actually, those who are not touched by the social care issue at the moment, are quite surprised that the NHS doesn't cover that already. And they think that this is part of the kind of free at the point of access service that is already covered by their kind of taxes. And so additional costs are something that people don't necessarily prepare for in their savings or in their financial planning.
Indeed. Well, on the back of that, the Housing Minister, Matthew Pennycook, a name won't be familiar to everybody, but, you know, if you want to know what an absolutely mad left-winger looks like, look no further than Mr Pennycook, because this fella is in another stratosphere of left-wing thinking, and he's one of the housing ministers. So, along with Angela Rayner, you can imagine what joys they have, Sophia, over there in that department. They're probably exactly as they want it. But anyway, in response to an urgent question in the Commons about council tax, there is suggested a potential shake-up of council tax affecting larger properties. So it's another one you can see, maybe not this budget, but the next budget. Well, we're going to, you know, put a 50% loading onto anyone whose house looks as if they've done a little bit all right for themselves. We'll sting them in the tail again. That one's coming around the corner as well, I think.
Yes, although I do, in defence of the Minister, I do think there is some work to be done on the council tax banding and how fair that is. It's based on 1990s. Exactly. It's based on calculations that are decades old. And I think, therefore, the government's right to potentially look at how that is allocated, because we know properties in the North East and North West pay disproportionately more than their counterparts in London compared to the value of the house. So there is something there to make that a more fair principle. But I think you're right that it can't be and it shouldn't be driven by a politics of envy. It needs to be about fairness and who can pay what, depending on what the value of the property is. Yeah.
Well, in Labour, Wales added an extra band, and was it band I think they added, for very expensive homes, charging 133% more than the band D properties.
Wow, there's many letters in the alphabet, so they got a long way to go.
How did they get to I? Hang on, if band D was the most expensive, surely the next one would be band E.
Who knows?
Unless I've forgotten how to do the alphabet. I don't know how I got in there, but nonetheless, there's an extra band for rich old duffers. That's the point. What about this one as well? We did break this news yesterday. Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, getting very, very upset about the term economically inactive. Now, what I find fascinating about this sort of bizarre sort of policing of language and the like is that I always thought that the term economically inactive was introduced because all the other terms were impolite, so they came up with one that was quite polite. Apparently it's no longer quite polite. In fact, it's very, very rude indeed, and woe betide anybody that dares use it, according to Liz Kendall.
Yes, well, I think the oxygen in this debate doesn't need to be talked about the terminology. It needs to be about solving the problem. And unfortunately, the Work and Pension Secretary didn't come up with an alternative name. And so if she doesn't want to call these people economically inactive, that's fine. But what is the alternative? And most importantly, what is the solution when we know that the bill for economically inactive people is set to skyrocket by the end of this Parliament? And in some ways she is right. It is a catch-all term. It includes people who have caring responsibilities, who may be very active, working very, very hard, but are not economically active, so they're not producing kind of taxable benefit. And so she in some ways is trying to recognise the kind of other types of work that people do, and that should be applauded. But those nuances really get lost on the public, and what the public see is a rising tax bill of people who are out of work, and the driving force of that are people who are out of work sick. 2.8 million of those who are out of work sick. And let's not forget that this cohort of people are people who are not required to seek work in the near future. So they are kind of off the conditionality regime of the universal credit system, yes, as it were. And a driving number of those are, of course, young people as well, a worrying number of that cohort growing from young people. So the problem is what to do about it. And the government have promised a white paper. So we look forward to seeing the detail on that. They said they will cut this. They can't. They say, and I mean either. They say they can't, and they will reduce the sickness benefits bill. We want to know how. They will have to look at the conditionality of how people are identified as out of work sick. I think they will have to look at tightening those regulations, and also potentially having more of a kind of easy route for people into work, so it's less of a risk for people to move into work. Because once you get into that kind of economically inactive category, it can be quite difficult to get out, and the incentives are not necessarily in your favour to get out.
That's true. Well, sickness benefit due to obesity costs 10 billion quid a year. I mean, you can't. If somebody had given you that headline in, I don't know, in the 1960s or 70s, people would have just assumed it was the work of a fantasist, that we would even be able to announce such heady, disturbing numbers. And whilst I understand that obesity comes around for all sorts of reasons, it's not about fat-shaming somebody, but you'd certainly be failing massively not to ask the question how a country has a bill of 10 billion quid because of people who are out of work through being overweight. I mean, that's an extraordinary, horrendous indictment on where we're at as a society.
It is, and it doesn't also automatically inhibit you from working if you are overweight or obese. You know, there's lots of different types of work now. You can work remotely, you can work flexibly. There's things that are kind of almost entirely computer-based work. So it doesn't follow necessarily that people obese can't work. And I know lots of people who are obese will work, but that doesn't follow that that's a natural progression. But I think you're right. We are an outlier in the UK of being overweight, and maybe some of that is to do with the free at the point of access healthcare, which so it disincentivizes people potentially to take responsibility for their own health. But also we know that the food industry is very incessant in its messaging for food that is not very healthy for people, that is full of kind of E numbers and saturated fats and other things that are really difficult to consume and kind of keep the weight off. So people are really on an uphill battle, even if they want to make right decisions.
Spot on. And finally, it's the 4-day week civil service bonanza debate. It's back again. Boy, do they love working less over there in the civil service. Look, we all like working a little less, but civil servants at DEFRA are pushing for 4-day weeks. They claim it's vital for a better quality of life. The PCS unions say could save the government £21.4 million annually through lower staff turnover and sickness days. So what's not to like? It's trebles all round, Sophia. This is a big rubber stamp for the 4-day week. Who wouldn't advocate for working less for the same money if they could?
I think that's the bit that confuses me the most. For the same money, and they say, yes, it will still save them money in the long term. I'm very sceptical.
But how much have they been wasting all these years in that case?
I don't think this is going to fly when you've got a £25 billion increase in national insurance for employers, and then on the other hand, trying to give civil servants less hours of the work. And I think, yes, maybe it'd be better for mental health. We know that's important, but we know work is also good for mental health. Yeah. But also, what about GDP, right? Mental health is not the metric that we should really be measuring success in terms of productivity, I would say. And in fact, GDP, we are very kind of sluggish at the moment. And in fact, London and the southeast outperform the average of the rest of the country. And so we really need to look at boosting the regional productivity, and cutting the number of hours that people work to 4 days a week is not the way. And we can't have bin men or nurses or teachers or surgeons or anyone who has a practical kind of hands-on job working 4 days a week. So why should the knowledge-based jobs have that privilege? They already have probably fairly good job security. They already have fairly good pay progression. I think they need to count their blessings there. I
think you're right, Sophia. Thank you, as ever, Sophia Worringer, political commentator with us here on Talk.